Lena Booker had $43 in her checking account the morning her husband told her to get out. Not the house, not the savings, not the car in the driveway that she had driven for 11 years without missing a single payment. He said to get out, and he meant all of it. The marriage, the life they had built together, the version of herself she had become while standing next to him. She stood in the kitchen of the home they had shared for 16 years and looked at the granite countertops she had picked out herself, the backsplash she had tiled by hand one weekend in March when the kids were at her mother's, and she did not cry. She was too tired to cry. She had spent the last 3 years crying in rooms he never noticed she had left. Lena took her coat. She took the small cardboard box she had packed the night before when something in his voice on the phone had told her this was coming. Inside the box was a Bible, a handful of photographs, and a spiral notebook with a cracked spine and grease stains on the cover. The notebook had belonged to her grandmother. Inside it were recipes, written in a hand so familiar that sometimes Lena would open it just to feel close to someone who had loved her without conditions. That was all she took. The rest, the furniture, the appliances, the retirement account that carried both their names, the joint savings that held 22 years of combined deposits, all of it had already been moved. She would not find that out until 2 weeks later, when her attorney made the first call. His name was Douglas Farr. He had been planning this for over a year. Douglas Farr was the kind of man who made people feel safe at first. He had that quality. A steadiness, a quietness, a way of listening that made you believe he was paying attention. Lena had believed it for 19 years. She had met him at 26, married him at 28, and by 30, she had left her job as a licensed practical nurse at the request of the man she trusted most. He had framed it gently. "The kids need you home. I'm earning enough for both of us. You've been running yourself into the ground." And she had believed him because she loved him and because she was tired, and because the logic of it seemed sound at the time. What she did not know was that Douglas had begun meeting with a financial attorney 8 months before that conversation. She did not know that in the years that followed, he had quietly moved assets, restructured accounts, and established holdings in his name alone. She did not know that the woman who had become his paralegal was also the woman he intended to marry after the divorce was finalized. She found out later. She found out most things later. In the meantime, she had cooked and raised their 2 children and kept the house running and believed, because she had no reason not to, that the life she was living was shared. Her daughter, Tatum, was 14 when Douglas told Lena to leave. Her son, Bryce, had just turned 11. The day after she moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus with $43 to her name, she called them. Tatum didn't answer. Bryce picked up on the 3rd ring and said, "Mom, Dad said you left us." She held the phone against her chest for a long moment after he said that. Then she brought it back to her ear and told him that was not what happened. That she would see him soon. That she loved him more than he would ever understand. She did not sleep that night. She lay on the air mattress a neighbor had lent her and stared at the ceiling and listened to the highway 2 blocks over and thought about the notebook in the cardboard box. The first week, she did not leave the apartment unless she had to. She ate saltine crackers and peanut butter and drank coffee made with a travel percolator she'd found in the closet of a friend who let her borrow it. She applied for her nursing license reinstatement. But the process took time and required documentation. And documentation required a fixed address, and her address kept changing as she tried to find something she could afford. She called her sister in Atlanta. Her sister said she was sorry, that she wished she could help, that things were tight right now. She called her mother, who cried and said, "I never trusted him in the way people only say things after it's too late." She called her attorney, who told her that Douglas had been thorough. The marital home was in Douglas's name. The primary vehicle was in his name. The joint savings account had been drained and closed 14 months prior. A withdrawal she had not noticed because Douglas handled the finances and she had trusted him to do so. The retirement account had been split in a document she had signed 3 years ago, a document she had been told was an estate planning update. It was not an estate planning update. Her attorney said the words protracted legal process and contested assets and temporary custody arrangement, and Lena wrote them all down in the margins of her grandmother's notebook because it was the only paper she had nearby. Then she sat with the notebook open in her lap and looked at the recipes inside. Her grandmother, Ruth Booker, had cooked professionally for 40 years. Not in a restaurant. She had never worked in a restaurant. She had cooked for families, for church suppers, for funerals and weddings and graduations, out of her home in Dayton with 2 folding tables and a cast-iron skillet she had owned since 1967. People had come from 3 counties over for Ruth Booker's sweet potato pie, for her brisket, for the cornbread that was somehow crisp on the outside and soft in the middle and tasted like something you remembered from a place you had never actually been. Lena had grown up in that kitchen. She had learned without being taught, the way you learn things that matter, by being present, by paying attention, by watching someone do something with love for so long that eventually your hands know what to do without asking your brain. She looked at the notebook for a long time. Then she went to the grocery store with $31 and a list she had written in her grandmother's margins. She started small. That was the only option. She made a pot of collard greens and a tray of cornbread in the apartment kitchen, using a borrowed Dutch oven and the single sheet pan her neighbor had thought to include with the air mattress. She brought it to the small Pentecostal church 2 blocks from her building, where a woman named Sister Yvette had mentioned they fed people on Thursday evenings. Sister Yvette tasted the cornbread and looked at Lena directly and said, "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Lena said, "My grandmother." Sister Yvette said, "Your grandmother needs to be on a billboard." 3 weeks later, Sister Yvette introduced her to a man who ran a community events catering business and needed a second cook for a Saturday funeral reception. Lena worked 8 hours and made $90. It was the first money she had earned in 11 years. She stood in the parking lot after and cried in a way she had not let herself cry in the apartment. Not from sadness, from something else, from the strange, terrifying feeling of being in motion again after a very long stillness. She kept going. She took every catering job she could find. She worked a church anniversary dinner, a retirement party for a woman named Bea who kept saying, "I told myself I was going to eat whatever I wanted tonight, and I am," a neighborhood block party where she sold plates from a folding table for $8 each and ran out of food in under 2 hours. She saved every dollar she did not need for rent and groceries. She wrote down every expense in the back of her grandmother's notebook, in the columns between recipes for peach cobbler and oxtail stew. By the end of the 3rd month, she had $900. The legal process was, as her attorney had warned, protracted. Douglas had a firm. He had resources. He had time. He filed motions and counter-motions and argued that Lena's housing instability made her an unsuitable primary custodian. And for a period of 6 months, Tatum and Bryce lived with Douglas in the house Lena had chosen, on the street where she had planted tulip bulbs 3 years in a row. She spoke to them by phone when Douglas permitted it. Tatum had grown quieter with each call. Lena could hear it, the way a 14-year-old girl learns to protect herself inside a house where one parent controls the narrative. Bryce still told her about school, about a teacher he liked, about a dog in the neighborhood that had learned to open a gate. She held those conversations like something fragile. During this period, a woman she had met at the block party, her name was Janelle. She drove a school bus and had a laugh that rattled windows, told her about a food truck that had gone out of business 2 years prior. The owner wanted to sell it quickly. She wanted $1,200. Lena said she had $900. Janelle said she'd loan her the rest if Lena would cook for her birthday party in exchange, and Lena said yes before the sentence was finished. The truck was a 1999 Chevy step van with a dented rear panel and a generator that needed a new belt and a serving window that stuck halfway and had to be forced open with both hands and a particular kind of patience. It smelled like fryer oil and old metal and something that might have been cumin. The refrigeration unit worked. The gas burners worked. That was enough. She named it after her grandmother. She had a magnet sign made at a print shop for $40 that read Ruth's in large block letters. She parked it for the first time on a Friday morning at the edge of a farmer's market on the north side of Columbus, and she sold oxtail over rice and sweet potato cornbread and a slow-cooked brisket sandwich that she had been perfecting in the apartment kitchen for 6 weeks. She sold out in 3.5 hours. She did not expect what came next. She had not let herself think that far ahead. But people talked. That was the thing she had not calculated. The way food moves through a community, the way one person tells 3 others, who tell 7 more, the way a woman will drive 20 minutes out of her way, because someone at work described a sandwich in a tone that made her put down her lunch and start looking for an address. By the 2nd month, she had a line before she opened the window. By the 3rd, she had hired a high school student named Quincy to work Saturdays. By the 5th month, she had a regular corner spot outside a medical building 2 miles from a hospital, and she watched nurses and residents come on their lunch breaks and thought, quietly, about the life she had left behind. She saved enough to get a proper attorney, a different one, sharper, with a specific expertise in contested marital assets and financial fraud. His name was Frank Delacroix, and he had a wall of commendations and a manner that was almost aggressively calm. Frank looked at the documentation, asked several questions, and then said, he moved the retirement funds before the estate planning document was signed, not after. That changes things considerably. It changed things considerably. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from building something without anyone watching. Lena understood this. She had no one to call on the evenings the generator struggled, or when the serving window jammed in the cold, and her hands were covered in brisket drippings, or when she sat in the truck after closing on a Tuesday in November and looked at the cash box and thought about how far she still had to go. But she kept a photograph taped to the inside of the cabinet above the stove. It was Bryce at 9, holding up a fish he had caught at a state park, in the way boys hold fish. Triumphant, slightly disgusted, very proud. Tatum stood beside him, making a face that barely concealed how much she was also enjoying the moment. She looked at that photograph every morning before she opened the window. She kept going. By the end of her first year with the truck, Ruth's had a following. A local food blog had written about her brisket sandwich. A community newspaper had run a small piece about her under the headline "From Scratch," a Columbus woman's second act. She had catered a church event with the truck, a corporate lunch order for 40 people, and a birthday party where the guest of honor was 91 years old and ate 2 plates of oxtail, and told Lena she was proof that some things get better with time. The truck was not making her wealthy. That was not the point, and she knew it. But it was making her something more important. It was making her someone her children could see standing up. Frank Delacroix filed in March. He had found what he described as a pattern of deliberate asset concealment. Funds moved in stages, accounts restructured in ways that were not reflected in Douglas's financial disclosures during the divorce proceedings. The retirement account transfer had been timed. The joint savings withdrawal had been strategic. There were records. There were dates that did not match the story Douglas had told the court. The discovery process was long. Douglas's attorneys were capable and persistent. But the records were what they were, and records do not renegotiate. In August, 16 months after the original divorce was finalized, a judge reviewed the revised filings and the amended asset disclosures and issued a ruling that required a full recalculation of the marital estate. Douglas's firm of attorneys had built a case on a version of events that the documentation no longer supported. Lena sat in the courthouse parking lot after the preliminary hearing and called Janelle and said nothing for almost 30 seconds. Janelle said, "Well?" Lena said, "It's going to be okay." Janelle said, "I know that. Tell me something I don't know." The custody arrangement changed in the fall. It was not a dramatic courtroom reversal. It was something quieter, A Guardian ad litem report, a conversation with a family court evaluator, 2 children who were now old enough to communicate their own preferences, and a set of financial disclosures that had made Douglas's credibility in the proceedings somewhat more complicated. Tatum was 15 by then. She had gotten quieter, then she had gotten angry, and then, slowly, over a period of months, she had started calling Lena on her own without asking permission. The calls were short at first, then they were longer. The night the custody arrangement was modified and both children came to Lena's apartment. A 2-bedroom now, the air mattress long gone. Tatum sat at the kitchen table and watched her mother cook and did not say much for a long time. Then she said, "You didn't leave us." Lena was standing at the stove. She did not turn around immediately. When she did, she said, "I never left, not for one single day." Tatum nodded like she was filing that away somewhere important. Bryce asked if there was cornbread, and Lena said yes. There is a local television program in Columbus called Homegrown, which profiles small businesses and neighborhood institutions and the kind of stories that don't make the evening news but probably should. A producer had seen the community newspaper piece about Ruth's and had reached out twice over the summer. Lena had not responded either time. She had been occupied with Frank Delacroix filings and the custody hearings and keeping the truck running through a summer in which the generator decided to develop an entirely new problem every 3rd week. In October, she finally responded. They filmed on a Thursday morning. 2 cameras, a producer named Jasmine who asked questions like she actually wanted to know the answers, and a segment that ran 11 minutes during the evening broadcast. They showed her at the stove, showed the line forming outside the truck, showed the notebook, her grandmother's notebook, open on the counter beside her while she cooked. The segment aired on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, she had 47 messages on the business phone number she had listed on the food blog mentioned 8 months prior. People she did not know. People who had seen the segment and wanted to place orders, wanted to book the truck, wanted to tell her that they had gone through something similar and that watching her made them feel like it was possible to come out the other side. She read every message. One of them was from Douglas. He had seen the segment. She did not know whether he had watched it alone or with the paralegal-turned-fiancé, whether he had recognized the notebook or the name on the truck, or whether he had simply seen his ex-wife's face on a television screen and understood, in whatever part of himself was still capable of understanding, what he had thrown away. The message was 2 sentences. It said he was glad she was doing well. It said maybe they could talk sometime. Lena read it once, then she set the phone face down on the counter and went back to the stove. She had 47 messages to answer and a line forming outside the window and a tray of sweet potato cornbread that needed another 4 minutes, and there was not a single second of her morning to spend on a man who had used 14 months of careful planning to try to erase her. She stirred the pot. She checked the cornbread. She opened the serving window with both hands, and that particular kind of patience, and she looked at the line of people standing in the October air, waiting for something that had come from her grandmother's notebook and her own 2 hands, and every morning she had gotten up when she did not know how she was going to get up. She said, "Good morning." She meant it. Douglas Farr's career had a quieter ending than his marriage. The financial disclosures that Frank Delacroix had surfaced in the amended proceedings were not only relevant to the divorce case. There were numbers that did not reconcile across several years. Douglas had worked for the same wealth management firm for over a decade, and the firm had its own compliance department, and the compliance department had its own questions. He resigned in January. The firm did not contest it. Lena did not celebrate. She was not built for that kind of satisfaction, but she noticed. In the way you notice the weather changing, a shift in pressure, something that had been heavy lifting without warning. By the following spring, she had saved enough to put a down payment on a commercial kitchen space, a shared facility, the kind where small food businesses rent time by the hour for prep work. It let her expand the catering side of the business, corporate accounts, event venues, A recurring order from a hospital cafeteria that had tried her brisket at the medical building lunch window and called her the following week. She hired 2 people. She kept Quincy on weekends. She still drove the truck herself most mornings. It was not efficiency. It was something else. The particular satisfaction of standing in a space that was entirely hers, built from a notebook and $31, and a loan from a woman with a school bus, and a window you had to force open with both hands. She kept the photograph of Bryce and his fish above the stove. She kept her grandmother's notebook on the counter while she cooked. Tatum started coming to the truck on Saturday mornings. She would stand beside her mother and watch, and occasionally, when the line was long and Quincy was overwhelmed, she would step in without being asked and start filling plates with the efficiency of someone who had been watching long enough to know how it worked. One Saturday, after the rush had slowed and they were cleaning down the prep surface together, Tatum said, "I want to learn the cornbread." Lena dried her hands. She opened the notebook to the page she had memorized so thoroughly she barely needed to look at it anymore, and she set it on the counter between them. "Your great-grandmother wrote that," she said. "It's yours, too." Tatum looked at the handwriting for a moment. Then she nodded and reached for the cast-iron pan on the shelf beneath the stove. The one Lena had found at an estate sale in her second month with the truck. The one that was not the original, but that worked exactly the same way, and she set it on the burner and waited for her mother to tell her where to start. Some things survive what tries to end them. Some things come out the other side not just intact but better, seasoned, worn smooth, more themselves than they were before the damage. Lena Booker was 47 years old, and she was just getting started. Whether a man like Douglas Farr deserves a second chance at the life he spent 14 months trying to dismantle, that is not a question with a clean answer. But this much is true: the phone stayed face down on the counter, and the cornbread came out perfect,